Good day, all, and welcome to the Teledyne Pulse podcast, your Rural Health Matters resource. Hear from your colleagues and industry experts on rural health issues and innovative care models that make a difference for rural hospitals, providers, and communities.
Hello and welcome to the Teledyne Pulse. Shane, we get this question a fair amount from time to time. Get a phone call or an email. Hey, we just got some grant money. Can you help us out? What kinds of things do we want people to think about when they get grant money?
Yeah, it's a great question and all too frequent.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Of all the grant activities that we've been involved in over the years, grants that we've participated in ourselves, or grants that we've actually assisted organizations in writing, or where there's consortiums or individual organizations, a variety of different things we've had experience with over the years in this front. But to your point, a fairly common question that we do get is, hey, golly, we got this grant, and what should we do with it?
Yeah, exactly.
What can we do with it?
What can we do with it?
And it sort of gets back to the old adage, sort of the cart before the horse in some instances. And in terms of, because again, I always gravitate back, this goes back several podcasts ago, but essentially, what are we trying to accomplish?
Right.
And so I do think that in most cases, folks are looking for, which most grants generally provide, is assistance with getting technology, by and large. And then there's some variances, of course, but for the most part, that's what they're looking for. Yeah. And unfortunately, the technology is a small piece of a large puzzle in many instances, and so they may have solved, theoretically anyway, the technology piece potentially.
Right.
But even in some instances, we've had questions. Okay, we got this dollar amount for technology, but they really don't know what technology, or what types of what should they order with that, with those funds. And so, and by the way, we appreciate these questions. It's not that it's not that we don't appreciate these questions. That the challenge becomes really trying to craft a vision around these funds that are coming in to acquire X, whether it's technology or some other service.
Yep.
And so I think the first question, again, back to my original statement, is, what are you trying to accomplish, is usually where we start.
Yeah.
And then generally we'll get into the nuts and bolts of, at some point, about what the grant's actually about. But, many of these conversations, when the first question out of the gate is, we got this grant, now what? Honestly, we end up not talking about the grant till about 30, 40 minutes into the conversation, as we're really trying to drill down, what do you want to accomplish?
Right.
And what types of services are you going to need to accomplish those particular goals or address those particular challenges? And sometimes we've had instances actually where the grant really doesn't address any of their main challenges.
No.
And so it becomes difficult to really hone a specific project or program for them. In many instances, it absolutely does fit in some capacity. It's just a matter of finding out where's that ideal fit out of the gate. And so I think as individuals consider applying for grants, or consider are there grant resources out there that are available, which there are.
Oh, yeah.
And whether it's through a grant or a foundation or their own local foundation, we've had some success on presenting various topics to local foundations, for example, which has been very helpful. But I think really at the end of the day, what it boils down to is, starting with the old cornerstone question I always come back to, is, what are we trying to accomplish here? And what ultimately do we need to accomplish here? And so starting with that is helpful. And we've done dozens and dozens of strategy sessions on that very topic. In fact, we do have an exciting 7-part series coming up on that exact topic, essentially, in terms
just
of
a couple of weeks away.
You're crafting your digital health strategy, which I think is going to be it's going to be awesome. There's been a lot of traction on that in the various presentations and sessions we've done with that. So excited to share that information with you all. But I think as it gets back to that, involving us or someone that's an expert in this industry to be able to help think through ultimately what do you want to accomplish with your digital health strategy, and then once we can really clarify that and create a vision around that, then we can say, okay, what kind of grants are out there to help us support this initiative.
Yeah.
And what types of, and maybe it's a foundation. Generally the foundation funds are oftentimes thought of on the back end when it comes to virtual strategies because, historically they've been used for large scale projects or large pieces of equipment or, the various departments within the hospital bring certain topics to a foundation to consider acquisition for whatever reason. And in some instances, virtual programs and strategies are a great fit for foundations as it helps them to meet their mission and deliver more care closer to home, keep more patients in their community, serve the community. It really is a nice fit in most cases for the foundations.
Yeah, working directly with the foundation allows the hospital to really customize it to what their specific facility needs. It's not like a cookie cutter government grant of some kind.
Right. And there again, that's why getting involved early in this process when you're considering a grant is helpful because it may give you some ideas and insight on some other avenues to consider pursuing as it relates to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Versus we had one scenario, for example, where they did get a grant and they did get a grant for a specific style and piece of equipment that they had already put into this grant. But then the service they wanted to accomplish with that technology wasn't going to work.
Yeah, yeah.
They did get the grant. They were successful in that piece, but in their end goal of providing a certain service with those funds, it wasn't going to come to pass. In addition to that, sometimes if you involve grant writers as part of this, which many do, many of them are unaware of consequences of a particular grant and how the grant is written in terms of what the downstream ramifications really are.
Yeah.
And I think I would suggest that it's a bad assumption to make that the grant writer knows exactly what your needs are and can articulate that seamlessly through a grant process. They know how to secure grant funds. They know the bells and whistles, the I's to dot, the T's to cross, and where to put what, and budgetary strategies, et cetera. Yep. But when it comes down to really crafting a grant that's in the best interest of the organization based on what they're trying to accomplish, I think that's difficult in a lot of scenarios for grant writers. But that being said, they're a valuable tool.
Absolutely.
If they're leveraged in the right way. And so I think it's important early in this process to always start with what are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to accomplish? Because in the end, if let's say you get a $100,000 grant or a $50,000 grant or maybe more, maybe it's a $500,000 grant. And, your goal with that grant was to provide, a comprehensive acute neurology and stroke strategy for the community, but the grant was for a basketball court. And I'm being facetious, but but it's you got $500,000 to build a basketball court that nobody really wants,
right?
And so I think it's just imperative to really go in with that clarity up front as you're trying to pursue grant strategies and grants in general. The other piece of that, too, is from a consortium perspective, we have worked with various health alliances, health consortiums of various types in grant strategies and what they're trying to put together for a consortium of hospitals. And there, too, I think it's imperative as a consortium to have an idea what you're trying to accomplish with the grant funds that you're pursuing as a group.
Yes.
And there are some value. There is value in pursuing that as a grant in some instances. But there again, I think it's, for example, if you have 12 entities that are part of this consortium and you're all trying to acquire a specific grant for a specific piece of equipment or technology, do all 12 hospitals need the same thing?
Right.
Do they all need the same service? Do they all need the same? Is it all in our experience has been generally there's variability there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, as you think through these types that we're always we've helped, I can't tell you how many different consortium meetings we've been to just help think. If anything, it's just to think through, here's what you should consider based on what I'm hearing. This is what you should consider as part of your grant strategy moving forward. Yeah. But I do think it's the earlier that an individual can get involved that can really help guide that clarity process and vision process for this is helpful would be one recommendation I'd make on that front.
Yeah. So the upfront work is important, but we still get the call sometimes saying, hey, we got this money. Now what do we do?
Right, right. And again, I think it's what we really try and do is just figure out what are they trying to accomplish and what we can do on that. I seem to be redundant on that statement, Shane. I need to knock that off, but I unfortunately
you can't write a program to fit a grant unless you really understand what they're trying to accomplish. It just makes sense.
Right. Well, like I said, regardless, there's more times than not, we can find a way that the grant, at a minimum, is somewhat beneficial to the project.
Yeah.
In most cases, there have been some where it's just not.
Right.
It's just like it's the basketball court needing a stroke program.
Right.
Kind of an analogy.
Yes.
But in the end, it is feasible in most cases to leverage those funds in a way that actually get used. Because the thing that's frustrating, I can think back when we started this, we started to talk with hospitals 11 years ago about this. And at the time, there was a large initiative that had moved out for, there was teletrauma initiatives, there was teleeducational initiatives, there was all these grandiose telehealth initiatives. And we were talking with hospitals that had 50, 60, 80 grand worth of telehealth hardware that had never been out of a box.
Yes.
And had just been sitting there for a couple of years.
I ran across some of that in the early days myself.
Or maybe it was mounted but never ever turned on, or the people there, the staff had changed over, nobody knew what it was for.
Yep.
It was there, but
there's this TV on the wall, but we don't know what it's there for.
And so our objective really is to maximize the utilization of those funds so that they actually do provide benefit and they do provide value to the community. And those entities where they've acquired those grant funds through recognize a solid return on their investment in investing in that particular project for that particular hospital.
Yeah.
And it's it goes without saying that the folks that are successful with grants, generally, if they've had multiple grants, typically what that means is the response back, or the documentation, at a minimum, the documentation back, is suggesting that they've used those funds appropriately and effectively to produce a positive impact or benefit. I will say that some are very great; they're excellent at the documentation part, and some I would even suggest maybe slightly embellished on the success that they've had with those.
Yeah.
But others, they've got all these funds and they had all this hardware or software, or whatever it was, and have done little to nothing with it.
Yeah.
And that's I think the frustrating part is really trying to maximize utilization of those funds. So when folks do call us about a grant that they've received, number one, we need to establish clarity around it and some vision around it. But really, too, is how can we maximize the use of those funds in an effective way that produces a positive impact on the community? And really, that's what you got to get down to.
So, Shane, sometimes when we get these calls, they don't have a real clear understanding of everything the grant covers. What kinds of things have we seen grants typically cover? And then what kinds of things have we seen the grant administrators say, oh, no, that's not necessarily something we're going to cover?
Sure. Well, there again, it kind of depends on the grant source. And so, the USDA does a little bit different than USAC, which does a little bit different than the feds, other federal agencies in certain fronts, which does it different than a foundation would do it, which does it different than what a different foundation would do it. So it really depends on the grant source. But I think by and large, at least historically, what we have seen is the grants cover hardware and software in most cases, and startup costs, infrastructure costs as it relates to that.
Yeah.
They'll cover other administrative types of fees, such as startup fees in some instances. We have not leveraged grants to help accommodate for administrative oversight of grants, and by and large, for example, there are some grants that'll pay for 1.5 FTEs to quote manage a grant or something like. We tend to not do that because we like those funds to go into stuff that's actually going to benefit the people on the other end, versus blowing half of the money on administrative overhead. So some grants allow for stuff like that and others don't. So it kind of depends. In terms of the services, which tends to be where the rub comes in.
Yes.
Where grants historically have not covered things like professional availability fees or professional consultation fees or other various professional fees associated with a particular program of regardless of the type. They'll pay for, in most cases, network support, operational support, infrastructure support, ongoing warranty, maintenance, etc., and then the hardware, and then the software stuff like that's pretty straightforward. And I think the reason it's that way is because it's more tangible and people understand it better on the administrative side of the equation for the grant writing companies. And in talking with a lot of the grant folks that are making these decisions, it is frustrating because we could do a lot more with grants if we were able to get some of the professional side of the equation covered.
Yeah, definitely.
As part of the grant. And that's where the foundations, on the other hand, have a little bit more flexibility on that front in most cases than does a lot of the federal agencies.
Yep.
And so although there's a disconnect there, or a discrepancy there between the two, there again, it kind of gets back to what you're trying to accomplish. So I think it, at a minimum, can help with, in most cases, get the technology off the ground and what you need in the platform or software, cover that in most cases for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years as part of your strategy. And then the clinical services the hospital may have to pay for, which incidentally, I think it's good for the hospitals to have some skin in the game on all these projects, just because there's actually data that would suggest those have skin in the game, the performance is collaboratively better in most instances.
Yes.
Rather than, well, it's 100% paid for by the grant, we don't really care if it works or not, type of a thing.
I think we've definitely seen utilization higher in the facilities where they have some skin in the game.
Yeah, well, in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases you do.
Yeah,
and I think it's healthy. It's a healthy process for the hospital to have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Versus saying, well, the only way we're going to do this is if we get 100% of it paid.
Right.
So then that goes back to how do you produce a return on investment as part of this program? So we're going to get $100,000 of this paid for by the grant. It's going to cost us $100,000 for the program, or what? I'm arbitrarily throwing numbers out there. And then it is, okay, it's going to cost us $100,000. We're getting $100,000 through a grant. And what does that mean for our patients? What does the downstream impact mean? Well, that means we're forecasting we're going to keep an additional 25, 30 patients here this year, in which case well than exceeds, I should say, definitely exceeds the amount of dollars you're going to put into the program in terms of the return on investment. And so I think it really is a healthy exercise to, once you establish that clarity, which is part of our series in terms of ROI strategies. And what does that actually look like for you? What can you forecast what this will look like? And sometimes a forecast is off, right? But in many cases it's not far off, and at least gives you a sense of, okay, we need to keep 10 patients with this program a year for the program to break even.
Right. And is that realistic?
Right. Is that realistic? And based on the data, we should have a pretty good idea if that's a feasible feat or not going in. And by and large, we've been pretty successful in picking that off and exceeding that in most cases. And in some cases by a lot, based on the grassroots strategy going in. So I think that's a key piece to really build that strategy around what you're trying to accomplish, but then leveraging the grant dollars in a certain way, the dollars you're throwing in, and then what's our break even? What does that look like with this program? And can we accomplish that? Do we think that's a legitimate goal?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we keep circling back to what's your strategy? What are you trying to accomplish? We've got a really cool series coming up in a couple of weeks. You want to tell the listeners a little bit more about the series we got coming up?
Sure. It's a fun series that we've actually compiled this over 10, 11 years of working with all these hospitals and executive suites and of huge health systems, small health systems, small critical access hospitals, and really compiled a very simple way to go about trying to drill down on how a digital health strategy can impact your organization, and basically some things to think about as you build that strategy. And there's 5 to 6 pillars that we would go through and have gone through in a part of these sessions. And in the end, what happened was it has been very well received. And one of the individuals said, you really should do all these components through your podcast. That'd be great. I'd like to listen to all these again. So, it's a great idea. What the heck? Let's break this down into smaller buckets and do a podcast on each one of these topics. And it really covers a lot of various things: system metrics, patient-centric metrics around programmatic strategies, and things to consider evaluating and evaluation of community outreach strategies. What's the community perception of your programs and your hospital in general? So there's some fun tidbits on all those fronts. And then a little bit about providers and local providers, provider staffing strategies and recruitment strategies. And then there's a section on nursing and nursing strategy. There's a section on technology and ultimately how the technology plays a role in all this. There's a section on return on investment. There's a section on system metrics in general. And it is, we'll slice it and dice it in a way that's appropriate for the critical access folks as well as the PPS folks.
Okay.
And so they'll be able to know which one, what to listen to, and maybe the one to avoid if you're interested in avoiding a particular topic. But nonetheless, it's I enjoy the heck out of doing those series just because the dialogue that's always generated in those is, and 99 times out of 100. Coming away out of those sessions, the CEOs or some other executive in this will say, I had no idea we could actually have a program that could address all these different areas, and versus, well, we need telepsych consults. Well, okay, but what else can we do around those components? And then once you go through all those components and you start the dialogue around what you're trying to accomplish and what your digital health strategy may be, then comes in the technology play. And what should you consider when it comes to technology and a platform strategy? And how do we condense that and tech stack that in a way that's conducive to what your end goals are going to be? And that's really at the tail end of it, where a lot of folks start with writing a grant for technology.
Yes, exactly.
Which is kind of where we started this conversation.
I think that's where we started.
But really, in all the technology is always about the last thing we talk about, and it's about half a minute of what we really need to cover. So, but I'm excited about that series. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so, too. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm looking forward to the series. I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of folks, and we'll look forward to that in a couple of weeks.
Perfect. That sounds great, Andy. Always great to do these podcasts, and even though on this one I was voluntold about this one.
You were a little voluntold. Yes.
Well, hopefully I was able to provide some halfway decent insight for you.
No, I think it's been great.
Perfect. All right. We'll look forward to the next series. We would like to thank you for joining us today. Our promise to you, the listener, you will be inspired or at a minimum find value in the information shared in this podcast. Please offer a comment or offer feedback so that we can improve this podcast and better meet your needs. Please remember to share this podcast with others that you feel may get value out of this by listening. And it's always helpful to subscribe to the podcast channel so that you're aware of future episodes and releases. In addition, if there is a rural health topic you would like to have covered on this podcast, please leave us a comment, or you can send an email to pulse@teledynehealth.com. That's pulse@teledigmhealth.com. For more information or general inquiries, please visit teledynehealth.com.